Back on Head On here on Shaw TV, Ian Holmes talking emergency preparedness with Karen Lindsay, Emergency Program Manager, City of Nanaimo, Erin Dawson, Emergency Program Coordinator with the City of Parksville. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of catastrophic earthquakes and the role of local governments to assist citizens in the aftermath. Karen, I'll start with you. What can people expect? Say we have a 7+ magnitude earthquake. There's significant infrastructure damage all around the City of Nanaimo. What do people get from the city in a case like that?
Well,
there's a $1 million question.
Yeah, it's a $1 million question, that's right. There's going to be a period of time where the city has to get its own resources together. So I think when we watch things, you see them on TV and you see these events happening around the world, there's this expectation that, you know, everything kind of, all the resources gather and people can expect help right away. There's going to be quite a period of time before we can actually get those resources together. Currently, we're able to provide service for, you know, the day-to-day emergencies on a regular and ongoing basis, but something of that magnitude, the city doesn't have the resources to manage it. And I would suggest, too, that most communities do not have the resources to manage something on that scope and scale.
Are we looking at community resource centers set up throughout the community where people can get food and medical supplies? Will people be going door to door? What are sort of that aspect of things on the specifics, Karen?
Well, especially the initial 72 hours or the first 72 hours is basically for city staff to get there to figure out, okay, what do we need to do? And there'll be an assessment of the community. There are centers that do open up. So we have 4 designated reception centers in the City of Nanaimo: Beban Park, Bowen Park, Oliver Woods, and Nanaimo Aquatic Center. But again, we have a team of volunteers, a team of very dedicated volunteers that go in and staff those for us. And then we have to get the resources in there. So as you can imagine, and when you see some of the visuals from other incidents around the world, that's not always an easy thing to do because your infrastructure could be down. Essentially what the local government looks towards or wants to do is, the primary focus is how do we get the infrastructure back up and running? So how do we need to check our water systems, check our roads. We need to get those things back and up and running, and that's why the individual preparedness is key.
Right, and we'll touch on more of that a little bit later in the program. Erin, City of Parksville, fewer resources, so they don't have the engine that the City of Nanaimo has, so to speak, in terms of emergency preparedness. But in terms of services, what can people in the Parksville area expect from the city in the aftermath of a large earthquake?
Pretty much what Karen has talked about. The same things are in Parksville that are in Nanaimo, just on a smaller scale. We have day-to-day emergency responders, police, fire, and ambulance to meet the day-to-day needs, same as Nanaimo, just on a larger scale. As soon as that large earthquake happens and overwhelms that capacity, that's when responses slow down. They just have to. There's more responses coming than the needs can, or the capacity can meet the needs of. So that's again where preparedness comes in, and we're going to talk about that later. What's going to happen is we do have reception centers like Nanaimo does. We only have 2. We have one at the Parksville Civic Center and we have one at the Baptist Church on Pym Street. One of the things that's vital to everybody to understand is, like Karen says, it's going to take us time to ramp up and get those things open. Our volunteers have to come together. They have to be able to get to these centers to open them up. What happens if that earthquake has affected that center? Now we have to look for another one. It's the same anywhere. It can be in Nanaimo, it can be Parksville, it can be Qualicum, or anywhere where the earthquake happens. We're not sure whether those buildings are instantly going to be usable or not until we've assessed them. So that slows down that process of time as well. But we are going to offer all those same, the same capacity on a lower level, or the same functions on a lower capacity, because we don't have as much population.
Now, you mentioned the local government angle, Karen. What about where military, provincial government officials, federal government, is there, because there's the senior government angle as well. How does that sort of play into what happens locally? I assume that wouldn't happen right away. The military is going to jump in and help everybody around here, but there's certainly that element, or those resources are there.
Well, throughout British Columbia, City of Nanaimo, and I know Erin in the City of Parksville as well, there's a very well-structured management system for emergency response, and it's called the British Columbia Emergency Response Management System, or BCERMS is the acronym that we typically use. And it's a very structured chain of command type of system. where as soon as we identify that we have an emergency or a situation occurring in our community, we then engage the province. And we have to follow those different layers. So we would engage the province, and if the resource request is more than what the province could provide, they then engage the federal government. So for example, when you talk about military, I can't just call the military and say I need military in here, because Parksville could be looking for something, Vancouver could be looking for something. So there'll be many communities involved. So the items are moved up the chain to the province. They prioritize as well based on the information they're getting from the different communities, and then in turn that goes up to the federal government. So it's a very well defined and a very well managed system, and every community participates in that, and our emergency responders also participate. That's how we work under that in the incident command system.
Another important part of the emergency preparedness chain is communication, getting the city's messaging out to the people in terms of where these community resources are, what resources are there, and what kind of help you can get. That I'm sure comes into the equation as well, Karen.
Oh, absolutely, and we've got several systems or mechanisms in place to communicate. We rely on some of the traditional media. We'll be looking towards social media as well, so the Twitter and the Facebooks. And something that lessons learned that we've seen in other countries and cities that have gone through emergencies is texting. We're really push texting, because that seems to be something that, as long as some of the infrastructure stays up, is consistently effective. In addition, we have our ham radio operators, and we have a very quite robust system for our ham radio operators, and we work on an annual basis with Coastal Emergency Communications to get their systems in place so that we can utilize them for communications.
Talk a little bit about the communications infrastructure in Parksville, Erin. How does the city get its message out in the aftermath of a big earthquake, which is the big threat?
And it really depends on what infrastructure has been affected. We'll follow the same. We have Twitter, we have Facebook. If the radio stations are active, we'll use the radio stations to get our messages out. If that fails, if there is no infrastructure available, then we fall back to our amateur radio, our emergency communications team. They do much like Coastal Emergency Communications does. We call ours the Emergency Communications Team for District 69. And they can send messages all around the world. They can send voice messages to the Kamloops, what we call the PREOC, the Emergency Operations Center for the province in Kamloops, if Victoria is affected and not available to us. So we can get the communications out. We can go that far, and we'll even revert back to even more simple things. When I speak to the public about how they get a message if nothing else is available in Parksville, I say, look to the highway, come out to the highway, and we'll start to put out sandwich board signs to tell you where you might be able to go to get to a reception center. So it can be as complicated and it can be as simple depending on what infrastructure is available.
Later on in the program we'll talk about personal preparedness, but it really seems to be very linked. It would be a job much easier for local government officials if people were very prepared. Would seem from the outside looking in to be very key, Karen.
Well, absolutely, because I think, one of the primary goals, if we look at the population, even just of the city of Nanaimo, it's approximately 90,000 people. What we want to do is we want to get the infrastructure back up and running to support those 90,000 people. Another concern, and Erin and I have discussed this quite a bit, is with the city of Nanaimo being a regional service center, so we have a regional hospital, we have a lot of the larger retail stores, we have a port facility, an airport nearby. We're part of what we anticipate, if people are able, is that we may see an inundation of kind of the outskirts coming into the city looking for assistance. So the more people are prepared, the more we can work on the infrastructure and get things back up and running. And that's essentially the key message, I think, from local government, is we really want to get those waters, the roads, the bridges, the fires, whatever may be a result of a catastrophic event like that, or even a medium event, is to get those systems back up and running.
The less people we have to support through those first days and weeks, the more time we have to do what Karen is talking about. So the more people prepared, the less people we have to support, the more effort we can put into putting things back to what we call the new normal.
Yeah. And I also mentioned to our people in the community when we're doing these types of presentations is then they can become part of that recovery process. So they also can in turn help that community recover and be part of that process, so they can become volunteers, they can help get that community back up and running. So it's critical, because the more people we're going to need, as many people as we can to help. We can't do it on our own. So
the residents are a piece of the pie.
Huge
And without
piece of the
them, we
pie.
can't complete it.
yeah.
As I mentioned off the top with this Auditor General's report from Russ Jones saying that British Columbia as a whole woefully unprepared for something like a catastrophic earthquake. It sounds like there's a lot of things happening locally to ensure that, to help protect the people. Where is the big problem from above that you guys are seeing that would lead to a damning report like that from the Auditor General?
Well, what I see, and Karen can jump in as well, but what I see is what we've talked about, where we have enough capacity to deal with day-to-day issues. Enough police, enough fire, enough ambulance. The hospital has that capacity as a regional hospital for day-to-day events. If we go to that catastrophic level, and if we talk about a catastrophic earthquake, it's not just going to affect Parksville and Nanaimo, it's going to affect the whole island, it's going to affect Vancouver. And so all of a sudden there's a huge demand on resources, and where are those resources going to go? Where they're going to be best used to the greatest advantage. So Victoria, Vancouver, they're going to get those resources first. It's going to be a while before that trickles down to us.
What about being on Vancouver Island? Does that put us at a disadvantage in terms of receiving help from above? Karen?
I would suggest it does. I think that, we are on an island, and even if you look at the mechanisms for transporting goods in and out of the island, by boat, by plane, by truck, those systems will get shut down initially, and there are certain procedures that have to get put into place until those facilities can reopen so that we can get the goods and services in. Now there are different ways of getting goods and services in, but again, as Erin mentioned, it won't be just Nanaimo and Parksville asking for these resources. So they're going to be stretched as well at the provincial level with resources, and then that's when you have to start building out and looking across the country into other countries possibly for support. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time to get these resources into a community.
Look around the world and see how long it takes to recover from events around the world.
It all ties into personal preparation, and we'll get to that after this commercial break. And yes, I'm talking to you about being better prepared. I'm not as prepared as I could be. Shouldn't really be blaming anybody else, but we'll get into that discussion and a little bit more after the break as Head On continues after this.